Committee, well, these are going to have to be separated, but if you knew it was in the insurance committee, for instance, you click on the insurance committee, there will be a list there of every single bill, and there's a hot link. So if it says House Bill 725, you click on that link, it'll take you right to the text of the bill. You can read the entire bill. It'll give you the history of the bill. Did it pass out of committee? Is it on the House calendar? Has it been passed off the House calendar? Has it gone to the Senate? It'll give you the vote. If there was a recorded vote, it'll tell you, it'll take you to a link where you can see every member who voted for it and every member who voted against it. It's really an excellent tool if you're into this stuff and you want to follow. I would suggest you pick out a bill or two and follow it throughout the entire process. Dr. Everett, I'll come back to you.
I know our time has been well spent. I would just like to know if you could give us information about where we are with Ed Bill. I know it's been postponed here a little bit. Are we really looking to change the education funding formula this for the upcoming school year, or do you think that's something we would do for the 18-9 school year? Are we going to really rush and push through for this?
Okay. This was billed as a talk on education, so I'm glad we've gotten to education. And we can continue to talk about whatever y'all want to talk about, but let's focus on education for just a minute. All right, so how do we fund education in Mississippi? For the last 20 years, we've had something called the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, MAEP. You've probably all heard of MAEP by now. And because the legislature has willfully refused to fund this formula for 20 years, there was Initiative 42 in the 2015 election, which was an effort to force the legislature to do what the legislature has heretofore not done. MAEP, let me just give you a little bit of background on that. MAEP was passed in 1997. It was an effort to avoid lawsuits that other states were being subjected to create equity in funding. Okay? Mostly southern states were being sued because in the wealthier places, largely white communities, they had plenty of tax dollars to fund their schools and do so very well. But in the poorer communities, largely black communities, like in the Mississippi Delta, schools were falling farther and farther and farther behind. They had inadequate funding, their structures were crumbling and old, and they didn't have enough money to pay for supplies and for buses and for teachers, and so there was inequity in funding. That was the genesis of MAEP. It devised a formula so that the money could be spread around and sent to districts based on student days, I think. You can tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it was attendance days. Average daily attendance, thank you, that's the term. And so the legislature was not saying through MAEP, Brandon School District, here's $2 million and here's how you spend it. But we were allocating a fair amount of funding based on average daily attendance to that district. The school board in that district then decided how it was going to spend the money. Of course, there are certain things you're required to do by the Mississippi Department of Education, but the legislature was not, we still had local rule, okay? And we still have local rule in the state of Mississippi. That's very important to people in Mississippi. I understand it, I get it, I believe in it too. For 20 years, everybody who was elected to office said we ought to fully fund MAEP. The road to out of the poorhouse runs by the schoolhouse, Governor William Winter said. Governor Barber said that education is an economic development issue. So bipartisan support, every governor in the time that I can remember has been for fully funding MAEP. It was the adequate education program. It wasn't the Cadillac education program, understand. It was meant to be the floor, not the ceiling. We could always do better than MAEP, but we should never do worse than MAEP. Yet we did. There was 1 year it was fully funded in 2008, but then the economic crisis hit, and so we had to have mid-year cuts, and it was cut. So really, I believe there's 1 year back in either 1999 or 2000 when it was fully funded. We are currently behind about $2 billion. And when I say behind, there is a number that the formula generates that should be allocated for K through 12 funding. And if you underfund it, then you're falling behind. And so in the years 2009, 10, 11, 12, we frankly didn't have enough money to fully fund it. Now, despite the fact that there is a statute on our books that says the legislature shall fully fund MAEP. And despite the fact that every court that's ever interpreted what the word shall means just what you think it means, that you got to do it. We didn't do it. But in those years we couldn't. And so it was hard to argue that we ought to write that check for the full amount when we just were really struggling. But then our economy started to come back a little bit in 13, 14, 15, and last year, and we did have the money to fully fund. We didn't have enough money to make up the difference that we got behind, but we did have enough money to fully fund. Yet we continued to underfund. Now, you will hear people say, we paid more for public education this year than we ever had. That is true, because while the formula keeps going up, and we're not meeting the formula, we are paying more than we did in the previous year. We haven't flat funded, we have increased it. We did flat fund a few years, but now we've increased it a little bit. So by way of backdrop for everybody, that's kind of where we are. Until 2016, everybody, including our current governor, our lieutenant governor, and our speaker said, we need to fully fund MAEP. Last year, they started calling the formula too confusing. And they said, it's old and it's antiquated. And our governor has most recently said, it's like a 1992 model. I don't know where he got 1992 because the formula was passed in 1997, but you know, there's been this whole change in philosophy about it in the last 18 months to 2 years, and now suddenly people don't like the formula. And there may be problems with the formula. I am not an education expert. Unlike the 121 members of the House and the 52 members of the Senate who suddenly became education experts when they got elected, I'm not. So I listen to folks who are education experts who tell me there's nothing wrong with the formula. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't look at something that is as big as this, as big a number as this is in our budget every so often. I agree with that. So what our leadership did was they hired a company out of New Jersey called EdBuild, which is a consulting company that looks at education funding formulas all around the country. They're a reputable company. There's nothing wrong with the company. However, they entered into a contract without getting the contract approved, and then they refused to put it up on the transparency website, which is there as a result of a bill that I passed when I was in the Senate in 2010, until that somebody said, hey, y'all got to share this, okay? You've got to be transparent about it. Then they put the contract up there. EdBuild has been looking at MAEP, and we have waited now for quite some time for the results of their study. We were told Thursday that Monday, EdBuild is going to be at the Capitol, and they're going to give us the results of their study. I can't tell you what they're going to do, but here's what I anticipate. That they are going to want to move from a average daily attendance model where we fund districts and let them decide how to spend it, to a per pupil model. Now, that in and of itself is not bad, but in other states where they've done that, where they've moved to a per pupil model, that was a precursor, if you will, for moving to a voucher model, where a parent can say, I don't want to send my kids to public school, I want to send them to private school, give me X dollars, that's the per pupil amount, I want to put that money in my pocket and I want to send them wherever. Okay? So there is a concern across the state that that may be the result of what EdBuild tells us about our model. There is just as likely to be the case that they come in and they say, you know what, y'all got a pretty good model, but we ought to tinker with it here and there because you're funding things like classroom supplies outside of MAEP, you're funding English language learning outside, you're funding advanced placement classes outside of MAEP, and so what you end up with is MAEP plus this, plus that, plus that. Let's put it all in one place and write one check so we know that takes care of K through 12 education. They could come up with that as a model. And I know that there are people on both sides of the aisle who are protectors of public education in this state and don't want to see us create voucher programs that would further harm public education. So at this point, we don't know what they're going to say. I'm going to listen to it with an open mind. I'm not an education expert, and I'm going to go to the people who I trust who can tell me what EdBuild is talking about and how that would impact our system of public education, and I'm going to make my decisions based on that. Yes, ma'am.
It would be.
And by the way, Doctor, you are, if you don't mind standing up and introduce yourself. She's a superintendent of Pastor Sham, and we appreciate you coming over today.
Absolutely, no problem. I think one of the things that's most important as we begin to get to a place where we know what the formula may look like, if it's tweaked or not, or if it's completely different, that before we really commit to it, I think it's important for us to look at impact data, how it's going to impact small school districts, large school districts, high poverty districts, low poverty districts, just so we can get a feel for what it really means to us, because we don't want to do anything that we would approve a formula and say this is what we're going to do if we hadn't really looked at how that's going to impact our learners.
You have my word that I will do that, and I'm going to tell you guys, you know, I don't forecast how I'm going to vote on things most of the time, but if we do anything that does harm to the fairness model so that children in the Mississippi Delta are not having the same right to a public education as children in Hancock County, I'm going to be opposed to it. There's just no way I'm going to be for that, because we've come too far in the state of Mississippi, and we have a long way to go, but we can't go back to something that is unfair to the impoverished areas in the state. And folks, we are really lucky on the Gulf Coast. We have good roads, we have good bridges. Some of it's a result of Katrina. We have good schools. We have very good public schools. We hold them up when we go to Jackson as a model as to how public schools should be done in other places in this state. There are places in Mississippi, though, such as Carroll County, that I've visited personally, where the buildings are crumbling around the children, where the superintendent has decided he's not going to take pay because it would be wrong to take that money out of the classroom, where buses are being put together with baling wire and duct tape, and the kids are having a difficult time. They're not keeping up in some of those places, and it's not just Carroll County. There are other places around the state. So, as a representative, as I see it, of the entire state, one of the things that we have to do is zealously protect every child's right to have a good public education in this state. I agree with Governor Barber, and I agree with Governor Winter.